I'm truly delighted to welcome three very distinguished guests here. Manish Sharma, who's Chairman and CEO of Panasonic India and South Asia. Swati Agarwal, Partner Consulting Deloitte. And a very, very distinguished entrepreneur, Mr. Hari Om Rai, who's Chairman and Managing Director of Lava International. Ladies and gentlemen, international trade, which had plummeted during the first two waves of COVID, has bounced back in a very big way. According to Untitled, the value of world imports and exports of goods hit US dollars 5.6 trillion in the third quarter of 2021, setting a new quarterly record. New projections in the November edition of the organization's Global Trade Update show trade in goods and services reaching a high of 28 trillion for the year, an increase of almost 24% on 2020 as compared to pre-COVID-19 levels. Ladies and gentlemen, I would request my panelists to give us their perspective on how do they see this trend panning in the future. India has grown at rapid rates when exports have grown. We are seeing India achieving record levels of export this year. So let me first turn to Manish and get his perspective on how does he see this trend panning in the future.
So thank you so much, first of all, for having me here. And my perspective, to give a holistic perspective on this particular subject, in particular supply chain. So essentially, we can divide the supply chain into three aspects. The first one is, out of the total consumption which happens in the country, how much of that are we manufacturing within the country? Essentially, the assembly operations. The second perspective is, how much of that is backward integrated? And the third question is, when we are producing within the country to be consumed within the country and a huge potential of economies of scale to be created over next few years' time, are we competitive on a global scale? So I think this is the kind of strategy and an opportunity itself, which at this point of time, many sectors of the industry is sitting at. I'll give you just one small example to begin with. You started off conversation around a huge category called air conditioners, which not only provides comfort and convenience to people, but now is also providing a value to uplift the overall parameters to upgrade the health and hygiene for people within their living spaces. The penetration of air conditioners is only about 6% of the total households in the country. This is huge potential. Comparative to some of the countries, while for the consumption are producing a lot of air conditioners in the country, so almost of the 7.5 million ACs which are consumed in the country, we produce about 6.5 million. But then the potential is immense. And now with PLI in place, we are in a position to backward integrate, start to manufacture the components which are required for production of air conditioners. And then the aim is that in next 5 to 7 years' time, how do we then become a force to be globally competitive and start exports in a big way? I mean, this is just one example to begin with, and we'll carry out the conversation.
Yeah. So Swati, your perspective on how will this pan out in the future?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kant, and thank you again for the opportunity to join this panel. Now, international trade, as we all know, is a culmination of the activity that is happening in the international markets as well as in the national markets. And what we've seen in the last 1 year particularly is a sharp increase, as you also highlighted with some of the data that you spoke about. Now, in terms of what we see happening in the future, we believe that there will continue to be a strong rally insofar as international trade is concerned. And I would like to highlight 2 or 3 things that may drive this rally. One part of the driver of the rally is going to be economic factors. And as part of what was panning out during the pandemic, we have seen governments across the world come up with several fiscal stimulus packages, which are driving both demand and supply. And this in turn will drive international trade. So we can't believe that the rally will continue. Another interesting aspect that we are observing is more behavioral in nature. If we look at consumers and the consumption side of things, we find that there is a bit of a fatigue setting in with respect to how COVID has panned out and the kind of longevity that it has displayed. As a result of it, certain consumers' behaviors towards buying are changing, and we are seeing factors like revenge buying, which are again enhancing the international trade activity. I believe that the rally would be strong cross sectors, but perhaps there could be a few sectors that could remain a bit muted because of the several waves panning out in several countries at different points in time. This includes hospitality, this includes tourism and such like. India, of course, is very, very strongly poised to ride this rally. And what we may observe in terms of services is that since physical distancing is a factor that's currently in play, we may find that the offshoring models may be slightly more aggressively poised for growth than the onshoring models. But overall, we believe we will ride this rally and it will be a strong rally.
So, Mr. Hariom, you've been a driver of electronic manufacturing in India. India has recently recorded its historic quarterly exports of almost 37 billion in December 2021, which was a jump of almost 40% compared to December 2020. It's important that India sustains this export growth over a long period. How do you see this and what are the challenges for India?
Well, first of all, your last question on global trade, I just wanted to, highlight certain things. The consumer is looking for a product with cost efficiency. And wherever the cost efficiency is, the manufacturer is actually getting those cost efficiencies from those countries. So therefore, global trade is going to rise. There is no doubt about it. Now, as far as India is concerned and electronics, product is concerned, finally, the economies of scale is the key element of the global trade. And it is not going to happen that 20 countries are manufacturing for 200 countries. It is only going to happen like in 2 or 3 countries or 5 countries maximum are manufacturing for 200 countries. So finally, it is going to be of, the most important is going to be economies of scale. Now, looking at India in context with electronics, the way we are planning the electronics to happen from India is that we believe that it is the opportunity for us to take 50% share of the global trade. I'm not talking about Asia. I'm talking about global trade. That's the possibility India has. Because we are, very, in terms of per capita, we are just 17% per capita of China. And finally, it's about skills. If we are able to get skill and scale, there is no doubt that with skills and the economies of scale, we'll be the most competitive in the world. So it is just the beginning of our, story. And the challenges are normally, I never find challenges outside of us. The challenges are all inside, actually. Deeply working and finding those things, out of, the way, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah. So, no, that's interesting because I also wanted to ask you that, the disruptions in the global supply chains are actually choking up important industries like semiconductors. And this is causing backlogs of orders. We have taken a number of initiatives like PLI. We have come out with a new policy on semiconductors. We are looking at some of the sunrise sectors of growth for the future. How do you see these existing supply chain issues? And is there an opportunity for India to relocate manufacturing here?
Yeah. So you're right, sir. Actually, right now, there are 2 issues, 2 big factors, large factors into play. One is the geopolitical factor, which is with China. Second factor is the cost of China is increasing because they have a rising per capita income now. They are now about $11,000 per capita. Therefore, the costs are rising and people are not ready to work into factories, etc., etc. So therefore, the core manufacturing industry, I would call the magnet industries are looking to shift out of China. And this is consistently happening. Every single large company is trying to see how can we build the chains out of China. This the first thing which is happening right now. Now on the semiconductor side, I think it's a trouble right now because the demand has increased due to pandemic, and also semiconductors are going to many sectors, and the forecast of the industries were not right. So both these factors have created challenges. Now, in the semiconductor, the larger companies like Apple or Samsung, they are still able to manage the semiconductor supply, and but the smaller companies like the Indian companies, they are the last one in the queue. Once everybody is, filled, and then the last ones are given the opportunity. Now, how can we, fix this? Actually, let me tell you what we are doing in our, at least what is that we are working at together with the government right now. We are, sir, looking at this as a great opportunity because Apple is coming in a big way in India. This is what we are seeing. Secondly, Samsung has also started exporting from India. Now, the Chinese companies definitely, they are a little, mute right now, in terms of, they are not looking at growing exports from India at the moment. But in my mind and in the government's mind also, sir, that we are looking at market access because China has not given market access to any company in China unless you exports from China. So this is the one important element, and especially in the, even the WTO allows us to, in the sectors for strategic security and defense, you can use the, such sectors to make sure that, if the market access is given, you are exporting also. China has done that for very long. We are going to use that. Now, as far as the Indian companies are concerned, how the semiconductor supply chain is going to happen for us, I think we are looking at some exclusive market access for Indian companies. And these are the two elements we are working at. The semiconductor is not going to come to India at that fast pace, but we have started, the exercise now. I think eventually we would be able to take control on semiconductor as well.
So, Manish, what are your thoughts on the evolution of new supply chains post-COVID? Because COVID has been a big disruptor, and there will be a huge, huge disruption post the COVID era.
Sir, I'll give you a couple of perspectives and potentially an extension of what Hariomji also mentioned. When we look at this from a distance, and let's say when we look at this from a perspective of a multinational company, over the last many decades, the strategy for multinational companies when they are in the process of creating a global footprint, to be able to look at markets from the perspective of opportunities. One, their attitude should start to change now that specifically for India, not only multinational companies should look at India market as an opportunity, but also as a capability. And in the last few decades, a lot of multinational companies, and the fact which Hariomji mentioned that potentially for MNCs, managing these disruptions is slightly easier compared to the domestic and the homegrown companies. The fundamental factor is that they've created international procurement offices to be able to manage their global supply chains, so-called hub and spoke models to manage the component distribution across the world for their subsidiaries. Now, India has to start to become a hub when it comes to the footprint of India being there in the global supply chain map of multinational companies. And second is, while the economies of scale will start to get created in our countries, essentially components will be divided into two. The first one is the one which will require a high capex. Semiconductor is one which you mentioned. Lithium-ion batteries, the advanced chemistry cell, which you are also pushing very hard, is another one, and few of those more. And then the second ones are kind of which are already gaining traction for consumption in the country, like compressors, motors today are cutting across variety of applications. And while we are looking at those large capex components to get manufactured in the country, including the fab, we have to also take some more right steps. For example, we have to ensure that population of PCB, the electronic PCB, which goes into variety of applications, automotive, medical electronics, power electronics, telecom, consumer electronics, IT hardware, and so on and so forth. We have to ensure as a country that the population of all the PCBs which we consume in the country starts to happen in the country. And that then will make it more feasible for global giants to bring in the fab manufacturing in the country. So I think it is a process. And while Hariomji is right that it may take some more time, but I'm very optimistic that in the near future, this is going to happen.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for that perspective. Let me turn to Swati because Swati, the government has already announced its flagship PLI scheme for 13 key sectors to attract investments. We've undertaken some very rigorous ease of doing business initiatives. We've implemented a vast range of reforms across bankruptcy, tax reductions, both on GST, rationalization of different taxes and reduced corporate taxes. We've given a huge push to infrastructure sector to reduce overall cost of logistic in the country. Any other reform you think that the government should concentrate on to make India the next manufacturing hub of the world?
Yes, sir. So the way I look at the role of the government, I would perhaps say that, it operates in terms of its role across four areas. So one, as you rightly mentioned, is the place where we are doing a lot of policy regulations coming up with packages. And I call that role as that of an enforcer, where where some of these policy recommendations are coming in and getting implemented. And a lot of what we spoke about regarding compliances falls in that area. Equally importantly, the government has a role of a facilitator, wherein we are talking about several policy initiatives, fiscal stimuluses, PLIs, and such like coming in. There are two other areas, sir, that I would like to highlight where the government can have a role. One is that of a creator. And what I mean by that is that the government very often plays the role of creating the backbone, either in terms of infrastructure, which could be digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure, or such like, where then the industry comes in and leverages that infrastructure and gets about their business. So when we look at the initiatives of the government, while a lot of progress has been made in this, maybe a couple of areas that can be considered could be particularly around logistics, where we are finding that there is a fair bit of disintegration or fragmentation across the modes of logistics, for example, railroad and ports, but bringing it all together in the form of shared infrastructure, shared governance would perhaps go a long way. So a national logistics portal, for example, could be one such initiative. The other place, sir, where we could perhaps also look at bringing in reforms is in terms of negotiations itself. We do know that we are bringing in several trade agreements. The FTAs, insofar as FTAs are concerned, the last one happened in 2011. Now it has been reopened. We are talking to EU, we are talking to UK, we are talking to Australia and such like. But perhaps accelerating those FTAs with the aspect of bilateral agreements, unlike in the past where it has been more multilateral and driven by WTO, but with a primary focus on exports.
So Mr. Hari Om, let me ask you, this historical growth in mercantilized trade across the world is also accompanied with rising inflation rates. And not merely, it's all across the world. Somebody in the field who's involved so actively in manufacturing, what do you think should be the most important trade-off in the coming years? Should it be growth or should it be inflation containment?
So the answer to this question is very simple and one word, sir. It is always be growth for India, because inflation is not just the fact of what is happening inside India, but it's also the factor of what is happening globally. And especially, most of the products, for example, if the supply chains are global, then because of the demand and because of lack of supplies, the inflation factors, and also how the world is printing dollars, et cetera, a lot of factors are leading to inflation. Right now, India must go for growth. But can I the last question in very short perspective I have, can I take that?
Please.
My mind, sir, the government is the biggest business of a country. The biggest business house, the largest business house of a country, in my mind. And the rest, the citizens are employees. And whether they are going to sit on the liability side of the balance sheet or asset side of the balance sheet, it is the government jobs. And businesses are just like the branch managers of the government, in my mind. How the businesses are being used almost like a tool to make sure that the citizens are actually able to work and deliver, in today is the most important factor. So for India, because we are 18% of the global population, while only 3.2% of the global GDP, our job is to supply to the world. And, and for that, we need skills and we need to build large businesses. I think the most important thing in my mind, because no matter, there is no golden answer, for anything that this reform versus that reform. I think the most important is that the ministries must be responsible for building businesses. Their KPIs should be to ensure that, for example, how much global trade are we going to, take in India? What is the total goal we have? Absolutely everything. Once we have that, the rest, all reforms are going to follow, that in my mind.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Manish, I wanted to turn to you because, India is amongst a handful of emerging economies in the world that is trying to engage in green trade. We've made a huge promise on carbon emissions. We promised to become net zero by 2070. Along with increasing India's status globally, this move has also opened up new avenues for economic growth. If you look at sectors like green hydrogen, solar photovoltaic cell manufacturing, advanced chemistry cell battery manufacturing, what role do you think India will play in the global trade of green energy technologies in the future?
We have a very clear advantage here. And thanks to the initiatives which we have taken over the last 6 to 7 years, in particular in the generation of green energy, so much has happened over the last few years. Now, the other perspectives are, one, are we creating energy which is in line with the aim for our country to contribute towards the promises which we have made on a global level? Number one. Second is the utilization of the energy itself, which is the distribution mechanism and where the consumption happens. If you look at last 6 to 7 years, specifically, for example, for the appliances which guzzle a lot of energy, air conditioners, for example, have not only caught up with the global standards of energy efficiency, but actually today, the India level is surpassing even the European levels. And the products which are being sold like air conditioners, refrigerators, washing machines, and televisions on energy efficiency rating are one of the best in the world. So we are like consuming energy in the most efficient manner. Now, another perspective where I think we'll be able to utilize our capabilities specifically into IT is managing energy. And you will notice that a lot of smart platforms are evolving where consumers, enterprises, large establishments are able to create a lot of automation, a better visibility for the consumption of energy to happen. So simply speaking, I think we have an advantage here. One, because we have implemented a lot of measures over the last 6 to 7 years, and the consumption is already very energy efficient. And as far as management of energy is concerned, we are now developing a lot of platforms which are now getting implemented. So I'm very optimistic here.
Yeah. Swati, any inputs which you'd like to give us on how India becomes the key driver of green exports in the future?
If we look up at the future from now through to 2070, which is where we are looking at becoming net zero, we've done a bit of an economic analysis to say what could it mean if we move towards being green vis-a-vis if we do not. And the kind of numbers that have come up are quite mind-boggling. The positive impact of sustainable green energy could actually have a positive impact of 11 trillion USD in India in terms of our own economics. Having said that, if we do not do this right, it could be a negative impact of $35 trillion. And this impact is measured across various things, use of our land, how our skilled labor will be able to respond to, working and productivity gains or losses therein and such like. So it's a very wide spectrum, positive 11 trillion to negative 35 trillion. We also believe that India would get to an inflection point basis the initiatives that we have taken so far in the period of 2040 to 2055, wherein if we do what we are set out to do between now and 2040, we will be positively poised. And if we do not, and if we miss the bus, then the inflection could be in a different direction. So definitely we have an advantage, and particularly in the areas of smart grids, wind energy, tidal biofuels, we have an inherent advantage, and we must ride on these to get to the right side of the inflection point.
Excellent, excellent. This is wonderful because I think India must take the lead in going for a green future. That is what will attract capital. That is what will attract valuation in the future. Both the country and the companies of the future will be those who push for green technologies of the future. So, Mr. Hariom, I wanted to ask you about innovations in the areas of artificial intelligence, machine learning, its quick adoption in the area of Internet of Things. These are all expected to redraw the manufacturing process. The abundant presence of high quality IT and high tech professionals in India is expected to provide a windfall to the Indian economy, as they will form the real bedrock of the back-end global AI and ML ecosystem. A multitude of companies have come up in India and are showing a lot of promise. What steps do you think the government should take to fasten the growth of these sectors in the country?
Great, sir. So I think, the time is for India to go from the back end to the front end, because the back end, sir, in my mind, has a very small value add. And opportunity for us is because we have skills, but we are not able to add as much value as the companies who are using our backend are creating value in terms of, Now, China has been able to restrict the country for, getting, those skills in their own country and build very large technology, build up in their own country. Now, they rival the technology that of US. I think the opportunity for us, sir, also is the similar opportunity we have, that the government can sort of work in the area. How can we create large, very, very large firms out of our technology sector, which is the IT sector, because it is the largest value of the world, sir. It combines all, to $15.5 trillion, which is about 17-18% of the global value which is being created. So it is very, very important that we create very large firms who are able to, later on, once we are able to create that, export from India and able to get that value. Otherwise, what will happen, sir, as we are going to grow our GDP, a very large value of ours is going to go out of the country, because most of the, the large companies are sitting outside of India, whether on the application or the platform side or everything. I think we have to start now, build, have very complete clarity. How are we going to build our own firms who are able to be, go to consumers and get the value from the world? That's the most important thing in my mind.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a really fascinating discussion. It's been wonderful to interact with three really outstanding people, Hariom Rai, Swati Agarwal, Manish Sharma. And I think this discussion has brought deep insights on how we need to position India, how we need to make India green, and how we need to penetrate global markets for the future. And that is really the way to go. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today in this discussion on Sansad TV. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.